Always great catching up with my next guest, Gerald Meerschaert, who's got a huge fight this Saturday. Biggest betting underdog against Khamzat Chimaev at UFC Vegas 11. Gerald, how's it going, man? How does it feel to be counted out?
It's pretty normal, I guess, at this point. Maybe not to this scale in a long time, but, I'm loving it.
How have the last few weeks been? You were on Ariel's show last week on ESPN. I see you getting a lot of press for this fight. Were you anticipating this when you signed the fight?
I thought I'd get a little more attention, but not nearly as much as I've gotten. So, and I think that's, we've been doing interviews for a while. If you just give me the mic and let me go, I'll say some pretty good stuff. But, people are just seeing it now because he had a lot of hype attached to him, so they wanted to see what his opponent would say. And, now that people are getting to know me a little bit more, I think probably see more of me in the future.
Do you remember the first time we were supposed to do an interview? I don't know if you remember this story or not.
No, I don't.
Okay, I'll tell it to you because I was just thinking about this before we set this up because obviously probably biggest fight in terms of who you're fighting and everything. We were supposed to do an interview for that Titan FC card that ended up getting canceled. But here's the kicker. Even before that card got canceled, this was like weeks before, the PR guy was like, here's the interview with Gerald. And then it's like, well, who's he fighting? It's like, oh, we're working on an opponent. And so I texted you and I was like, look, I'll do the interview. I'm cool with it. We'll do it once you actually get an opponent down. Do you remember this?
That's so long ago. I didn't remember that at all. I remember
that's how long ago it was.
Yeah, I remember that card. But that makes sense because that ended up not happening.
That entire card did. And there was a lot of UFC fighters that went on to the UFC, including yourself. There was Grant Dawson. There's a whole bunch on that card. It was pretty nuts, actually.
Yeah, and the guys that didn't go on to the UFC were most likely vets because they had a lot of guys on there that had either been in UFC or Bellator fighting on that one too.
Yeah, no, it was pretty crazy as far as that goes. But anyways, let's get into your fight here. I wanted to actually start before that. You were supposed to fight Ed Herman. What happened? I never really got a reason for why that fight didn't pan out because that was last week.
Yeah, so we were tried to reschedule to the 12th. And I just kept coming back with positive corona tests. And it got to the point where it was getting closer and closer. And I was like, well, I don't want to waste anyone's time, my time, UFC's time, at Herman's time. So I talked to my coach and my manager, and we were like, well, because they say after 10 to 14 days, if you show no symptoms. For me, I was very fortunate. I had a stuffy nose for a couple of days, and I was fine. So they're like, if you don't have any symptoms, according to us, you're fine to go back to normal. However, the gym's still taking extra precautions and everything. They're like, we want a negative test before you back in the gym training, and then all this other stuff. So I was like, well, I can only do so much at home without partners, and I don't want to go through all this stuff and set up everything and go there and still be positive. And, not only will I waste everyone's time, but I'll be stuck in Vegas in a room by myself for 10 days for literally no reason when I could just tell them now, hey, find somebody else. And another thing they started doing too, they've been sending out COVID tests in a package and having us Zoom conference and send them in advance so we know for sure. And that probably, could have been another thing. But luckily, right after that, I just happened to start getting negative tests because it was one of those things where, I can't predict the future and I didn't want to just bank on it being negative. But once I did get the negative test back, got back in the gym, and it just happened that they needed an opponent for Chimaev, and I got it.
Awesome. Have you been feeling all the, the hate on social media from the Dagestani fans? Because he's got a huge following. Even I'm seeing people all the time saying this guy's going to be the next champion next year, all this stuff. Have you felt that?
I've seen a couple comments. The funniest part is when everybody keeps typing out in Russian or whatever, and I don't read, write, speak. I have no idea what you're saying. I assume it's something negative because there's always the wolf emoji with it. But other than that, I don't really pay attention to the comments much anyway. I've noticed them, but I'll just post my stuff. I get out of there. It's way better for your mental health. Once in a while, if I'm feeling froggy, I'll engage with some people, a little banter back and forth, but I try to stay out of it.
Were you surprised to see yourself as this much of an underdog? I could see if you were fighting Israel Adesanya and, you're coming off a, first round loss in your last fight, but you're fighting a guy who's got 2 fights in the UFC, and granted, he's looked great. But, you're a vet. You've been in the UFC for a couple of years now. Were you surprised when you saw the odds?
I wish I could say I was, but honestly, I wasn't. I almost guessed what I was at the time. I was pretty close. And, it's just one of those things where the sport hasn't been around long enough where enough people have enough knowledge and, can put it to real practical use, because it just seems that if you got the hype behind you, that they're just going to assume that that's what it is. And still, there's a big thing in MMA, which I don't know why, because it shouldn't be. We've seen it time and time again. just because you're undefeated doesn't mean anything, especially when you take the step up from the local regional scene into the UFC. There's one guy that's done it so far and looked really good, or well, maybe like two or three guys that I can think of off the top of my head, but that's a very, very rare instance. And in this case, everything that he does well, I feel like I can do better. And anywhere he wants to fight, I'm dangerous. That's the biggest thing for me is like he has to get his hands on me to have a chance, which also gives me a chance to finish him. Because as soon as he grabs onto me, he's open to submissions. And, if apparently the odds makers don't know what jiu-jitsu is, or they just don't follow it or something, or they just looked at my record and were like, well, he's got, a bunch of losses, so he's probably going to lose. But if they understood the game a little bit, they'd see that like he's coming into a pretty bad matchup on paper.
Well, do you think a lot of people are putting too much stock in that last fight? Because I think, we've talked about this. I think it was, maybe one of your worst performances, which happens. I mean, we're just being honest here. Because if you look at most of your fights, usually you'll survive and then end up coming back or at least make it a bit of a fight. But do you feel like that's why the line is so high? It's a combination of him being hyped up and then also just your last fight?
I mean, it could be. Like I said, I got caught. You know what I mean? I made a mistake and I paid for it. And that's one of those things like it almost never occurred to me that I could get finished like that because, as you said, I've been in there with some really big strikers. I've taken big shots, and I've always found a way back. But, that was an instance where I didn't see it coming. And if you don't see it coming, you can't brace for it. So that's a big difference. And, learn my lesson from that. Not going to make that same mistake again. Especially because Chimaev, you probably saw that, and like all he does before he shoots, he either ducks, throws overhand right, or he throws a right head kick, hoping, that the guy will engage with him, and then he shoots off that. So, that's kind of out the window now because lesson learned.
Do you feel like this is almost the perfect recipe, though, too? Because even if you look at so aside from your last fight, you had a couple losses in there, but they were split decisions. The Kevin Holland fight, the Eric Anders fight. I mean, we spoke about this off air. I mean, those were fights where I feel like people, the judges should have given you the nod in there. So you really could have had a 4-fight winning streak heading into your last fight. Do you feel like it's kind of the perfect storm where he's got two really impressive wins over guys that maybe aren't the level that you are at, and then you have these losses where, I mean, other than the Heinisch one, you could have been on a winning streak heading into that last fight.
Yeah, well, so it works out for me really well, right? Because like we were talking about, if you're a guy that just looks at the records, maybe you're for one of these odds makers and you don't really understand what you're looking at too well, you would think that this is a decent test, but he should be okay. Where really it's a terrible fight for him if you're planning on having him fight anybody right after me, for one. And two, it's great for me because, like I said, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but had I had the 4-fight win streak, it'd be a lot different. But now I get to make up for that, right? Because at the end of the day, I've had some opportunities to go up in competition, and I've seemed to stumble when I get there. I'm just being honest about it. It sucks. I got to deal with it, but it is what it is. So now I get a chance to correct that immediately. And if I got to do it off some guy that they think is the next coming of Khabib, so be it.
What type of training camp have you had leading into this?
It's been different, but I've seen everything, I've done everything, so there's not anything that he's going to do that I haven't already faced in an actual fight or in the room. First of all, and I actually went down to Missouri for a few days with my coach Duke Rufus. I was working with him and Dean Thomas and Tyron Woodley, kind of helping each other out.
Okay.
Get ready this last week. So yeah, that was really, really beneficial.
Interesting. Okay. And then, because I know there's been a lot of changes to Riversport. I know Daniel Vandelay is no longer there. I know Mike Biggie Rhodes left and he's with Eric Koch now. Did that impact you at all, back at home in terms of who you were used to working with?
I mean, it definitely did because, I worked with Biggie and JP is another guy who moved. I worked with them all the time, but it is what it is. They had different directions they wanted to go with stuff. And, I still got a bunch of really good training partners. I still got my guy, Jordan Newman. He's a
Bellator standout. Yeah.
Yeah. 2-time D3 champ. Might be, if he's not the strongest human being, he's one of the strongest human beings I've ever grappled with. It doesn't make sense. And generally when guys get tired, they get weaker, and he just doesn't. He's just more dangerous because he can't control himself. So if I can keep that big dude off me, I'll be just fine with Khamzat.
Yeah. Any Anthony Pettis' camp, or is he off? And Brendan Allen, I know, is back home, so you didn't get to work with him either.
Yeah, Brendan will be there fight week, so he's another good righty, really good grappler. He'll be working with me, another big body. Anthony has been in and out here and there, so I've seen him a little bit, but obviously completely opposite style of what Anthony is, so I'm not too worried about that. But, I've taken all the appropriate steps to make this, the performance for me that it should be.
And the weight cut's good heading into this fight because you were supposed to fight at 205 against Ed Herman, so now you actually have to cut weight for this one.
Yeah, no, I mean, my weight's always good. I've been slowly kind of filling into my man body, so like I actually have to cut a little bit now, but it's still, I'm not going to miss weight. That'll never be a problem. Even for the Ed Herman fight, it was one of those things where it was like, I see people, especially if it's going to be one fight, why are you trying to I got to be heavier? Well, if there's no purpose behind the weight, it doesn't really matter. So I wasn't going to put on any extra weight. I just wasn't cutting weight. I just wanted to be comfortable, and so I could be the best fighter I can be in there.
How's this fight playing out on Saturday?
Him laying on the floor and me with my hands raised.
Do you see you do see a finish though in terms of you don't see it going to the distance, or how do you envision it? I know the fight could play out in a number of different ways, but.
So I think I'm going to frustrate him. I think he's going to start making some mistakes because he's going to, he has yet to deal with anything like this. And I don't care. I'm sure he's got really good training partners, right? I'm sure he's got guys in the gym that give him tough looks all the time. But he's going into an actual fight competition setting in the highest organization in the world against a guy that he clearly thinks he's just going to walk through because he's already started naming names and planning out his, when you start looking past people, you're going to get yourself in trouble. And he's going to go in there with somebody where he's best is probably the worst place for him to be. And not only that, but I'm going to make him work to get where he's best if he can get there. And if he can get there, he's going to have to have fought so hard to get in those positions and be so tired and worried about all kinds of other stuff, he's going to fall into a trap.
And do you sort of referenced it there, but the experience, I mean, you've got 44 fights. He's only got 8. I know he has some kickboxing fights and some other disciplines that he's trained in as well, but how much of an advantage is that? Because you talked about it. If the fight goes on, you've been in those situations where a lot of his fights have ended early.
Right. And I'm not expecting him not to be conditioned or,
he'll be in shape, and he's absolutely talented. I'm not downplaying him. I just think it's crazy that he's such a big favorite.
Oh no, I'm just saying for me, if anyone thinks that I think that, he's going to be really mentally tough. He's going to be hungry. He's going to come at me with everything he has. But having seen it so many times, I'm going to be one step ahead of him everywhere, right? And I've been able to try stuff in fights that he hasn't even thought about in the practice room yet. So I think that kind of experience, that kind of gamesmanship and veteranship is going to really, really pay off. And he's going to step in there, and it's going to be a very, very different for him when his opponent doesn't lay down and do exactly what he wants. And not only do I start fighting back, but I start putting him in positions that he's not used to, putting him in places that make him, second guess what it is that he wants to do.
I don't think you've been this much of an underdog in the UFC so far. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe the Santos fight, I'm not sure. But have you had a lot of people reaching out saying, "Hey, I got some money on you"? Maybe more than usual, just because there's people who are kind of seeing the experience gap here.
I've seen, I haven't paid that much attention, but I've seen a couple of people talk about how they were going to put some money on this because it's really great odds. If you want to make some money on the 19th, whatever my bookie or whatever 5 dimes or whatever you're on, put some money down on GM3.
There you go. Gerald, appreciate the time, especially during fight week. Always great catching up with you. Just remind people where they can find you on social media, and if you got any sponsors or shout outs, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, if you even get close to spelling my name right on Google, I'm sure I'll pop up. Other than that, shout out to my gym, Rufus Ford and Combat Corner.